Hello everyone. We're going to talk today about education and all the fascinating but complicated issues involved in school reform, major topic in cities. There are a whole range of topics here and we're going to touch on most of them. One central issue is federal involvement. That has been especially intense with No Child Left Behind, which we'll talk about. A second issue is mayoral control, basically the idea that someone has to be responsible for schools, and the mayor in a city is the person who should be in charge of schools. There's the crucial question of charter schools, very important. There's the question of large versus small schools and the powerful small school movement that got going a couple of decades ago. There's the crucial question of testing. How do we figure out, how do we measure what's going on, and how do we measure teacher effectiveness? And that's related to the question of incompetent teachers. Measuring teacher effectiveness is crucial, especially in weeding out incompetent teachers. On the other hand, it may not be that easy to be certain who's an incompetent teacher, although in some cases it probably is. There's the question of de facto segregation. Obviously, segregation by race in schools is not legal anymore, but if neighborhoods are segregated by race, then public schools in those neighborhoods are going to be de facto segregation. That may not be a good thing. There's the question of funding for schools, very important in these budget-challenged times. There's the question of science and math education, the view that the United States is increasingly falling behind here. And as I said, there's the question of No Child Left Behind, which we're going to address right now. No Child Left Behind was basically a program started by President Bush in 2001 in alliance with Democrats, especially Ted Kennedy. And they secured the passage of the No Child Left Behind Act. What the act did is it basically required every school system to implement a testing system and schools that didn't meet the yardsticks for that testing system got into serious trouble. The testing system was basically annually and in core subjects like math, science, and social studies. Crucially, the Act left it up to each state to decide what should be known and to impose its own standardized tests. The Act basically said that the results have to be analyzed by subgroups. The results of the tests each year have to be analyzed by subgroups, and subgroups in particular that the Act required data to be given for were racial groups, blacks, Latinos, Asians. And the idea was that what was motivating this was the idea that in the public schools these days, often blacks and Latinos are not getting an adequate education for a number of reasons. So the Act was trying to, first of all, get data on that and then address it. Each subgroup had to show a 10% improvement from the previous year in order for the school to make its annual yearly progress. If the school didn't make that improvement, the school had to notify the parents and tell the parents what it was planning to do about it. And after a few years, if the school wasn't making its standards, it has to restructure. So there are very serious consequences there for the schools. One problem is that the schools weren't given a huge amount of money to make reforms, and so the Act basically required them to get better, but didn't really fund ways in which they could get better. But basically, as I said, the law was trying to close the achievement gap between minorities and the rest. It's been very consequential. It's certainly one of the main reasons driving the teach to the test tendency for teachers, because the principals are very concerned about all this. And so No Child Left Behind is a major issue. Just recently, the Federal Education Department has somewhat modified the requirements of No Child Left Behind and allowed for exemptions. Anyway, it's a major issue. Another major issue, of course, is charter schools. Charter schools, the two principles guide charter schools. First of all, they're autonomous public schools. They're public schools, but they're autonomous, and so they're free of a lot of the procedural requirements that bind public schools. The idea of charter schools was let's get around somehow some of the more stifling parts of the public school system. But they're also accountable for student achievement. They're given charters from the state. The states are the ones that issue charters for schools to operate, and typically those charters are for a certain number of years, and if the school doesn't perform adequately, then the charter is not renewed. So there's a lot of pressure on charter schools to perform. How have they done? Well, the answer is that now we have research. Some charter schools are good and some are bad. You can see the pros and cons. On the one hand, the pros are that a charter school can be free of some of the bureaucracy of the regular public school. The cons are that they're new schools and they're not necessarily run well. They're run often by private entrepreneurs, and they're not necessarily an improvement on public schools at all. So in line with the general conclusion for this whole topic, which is there really aren't any silver bullets these days in education, although people hope there were. Charter schools aren't a silver bullet. They may be a success. They may not. It just depends. Mayoral control was also another silver bullet, hoped for silver bullet. Basically, Chicago implemented mayoral control in 1987. Chicago in 1987 had some of the worst schools in the country, and it was believed that basically one major problem with certain school systems, New York and LA especially, but also Chicago and Boston, was that there was an elected school board, but no one really was responsible. The elected school board appointed typically a chancellor, but the elected school board were typically elected from a range of places around the city, and so there was no single figure who was basically responsible for deciding if the school's chancellor was doing a good job or not, and who could be blamed. So it was generally agreed by many people, especially Boston and Chicago, that the mayor had to be able to appoint the head of the school system. It wasn't really any good to have an elected body that appointed the head because there wasn't accountability. So they implemented that in Boston and Chicago, and then in New York, Mayor Bloomberg was one of the first mayors to appoint the head of the school system, and he basically said, "Look, it's my responsibility, and I'm going to be known by whether my head of the school system is doing a good job or not." Mayor Bloomberg made that very clear. Under Obama, Arne Duncan, who had been head of the Chicago school system, became Secretary of Education, and in that job, he put in a number of innovations. He's in favor of merit pay. He's in favor of accountability, holding schools accountable, especially via mayoral control. He's very much in favor of standards and testing so we can see what's going on. He's in favor of closing the achievement gap between races. These are all laudable goals. He's increased the number of charter schools. And he's in favor of more money for Head Start and early childhood. And he introduced an innovation in Chicago, having year-round schools, longer school days. He said, look, we got these buildings, we've got these wonderful school buildings, and yet mostly over the weekends, for example, they're not open. What we want to do is we want to open them over the weekends, and we want to open them in the evenings, because there's a lot of kids out there who don't have great family settings. They don't have great facilities at home. And they're much better off being able to go to school in the evenings. They can stay there just so they can hang out there and study, and especially over the weekends, they can also do that. So he's very much in favor of year-round school, longer school days. What's the net result of all this? Well, the result is, as I said in the beginning, that there's a lot of ideas out there, and they're all being tested and so on and so forth. But the conclusion is that there's no single silver bullet. No single one of those ideas seems to be the solution. Probably for a good school system, we need to implement 2 or 3 or 4 of those ideas, and we need to monitor it all the time. Anyway, it's a tremendously important topic. Conclusion, at this point, no silver bullet. Thank you.